Welcome back to another episode of AM Sports Consultancy. My name is Anthony Morrissey, the CEO and founder of AM Sports Consultancy. As I said, this is another one of my aunt's chats, so I'm looking forward to getting the guest in front of you that I'm going to be here. We're recording this in January. It's a bit cold in Ireland even. I moved back to Ireland for a couple of weeks, and it's a bit cold here, but I'm believing it's minus 19 in Sweden, and my wife tells me this morning. So when this gets out, hopefully it'll be, I think it's in February, I'll be sending it out. It'll be a little bit warmer and people will start getting ready to it. But there's big sports games coming up all around the world, whether it's the NFL in the States, whether it's rugby in Ireland, whether it's ice hockey in Sweden, or wherever it can come from. And my guest today is definitely someone I'm looking forward to talking to, just purely out of the knowledge that I got. One of the podcast I did recently with AJ Poole, Jason got in touch with me after that, just having a quick chat across, and it's really interesting into his insights, and I'm fascinated to hear what people think of what he's going to speak. He's got so much experience in baseball and basketball and loads of other areas within it, and now he's looking after his own sports consultancy and events coordinator and that kind of stuff. So really looking forward to hearing what he's going to say. So do you know what? You're not listening to me talking all the time. You want to hear what he has to say. Jason Kobeda, how are you doing?
Doing well, Anthony. How are you?
I'm doing good. First of all, I said off air, explain the story of the jersey behind your head. The reason I'm saying this is because I've got ex-colleagues of mine from Munster, and I'm really interested to hear this story as to where you got that jersey from. Explain it to me.
Yeah, well, I was fortunate to spend nearly 9 years working in baseball, and when I left the commissioner's office at MLB, they were kind enough to give me a jersey from my hometown team there, the Pittsburgh Pirates, and 2019 commemorates the year that I left there. So yeah, it's something that I'm very proud of and cherish. So it sits proudly behind me.
It's a class jersey, my man. I must admit, it's an absolutely class jersey.
I can't say I'm the starting pitcher, unfortunately, but this is good enough.
Look, in 30, 40 years, you can say whatever you want. I'd be holding on to that and saying that any claim you possibly could take. Just go right back to yourself and where this all came from, and the love of sport and what it means to you. I kind of looked in your LinkedIn profile and I saw a lovely little quote at the start of your LinkedIn profile about when you were a kid and your dad, and you went to the games with dad. Can you explain where your love of sport came from?
Yeah, that's really where it started. You know, whenever I was growing up, I used to go to sporting events often. I would go see Pittsburgh Pirates game. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania originally, live in New York City now. But going to those Pittsburgh Pirates and Pittsburgh Steelers games and Pittsburgh Penguins games was something that I just really looked forward to. And it really wasn't always just the sports experience. It was any event that we would go see there, whether it was a monster trucks, rally, or you name it, Disney on Ice, whatever I was going to see. It was always very awe-striking to me, and the sense of enormity and the awe-striking facets of seeing a venue come to life is something that really stuck with me, and they were always the best memories I had of being a child. So as I've gone through my career and operated sports venues and events, on a number of different levels across the world, it gives me a great opportunity to see other young people that were in my position at that time and look at them and say, I know that this is something they're going to remember forever. And it's very gratifying and fulfilling to know that you were a part of it. So, it's something that I cherish. And obviously, like I said, got a stadium seat back above me too. That was from Three River Stadium, where I, grew up going to games. So yeah, that's sort of where it all evolved from for me.
I love that story because it's very similar to myself. My father we lived in Ireland, and my father would have brought me over to England to see what are now Premier League soccer stadiums. But we would have just gotten on the tube or the train, and we'd have just gone to different stadiums just to be outside them. And I love the idea of being around a sports stadium. And I remember even going to New York in the late 90s and just being in awe of everything around whatever game I was at. I wouldn't remember the teams. I wouldn't even remember the score lines, but I remember being around stadiums and stadias. When you were growing up, was there a hero of yours that you would turn around and say, do you know what? I really love going to see X player. That was the one guy. Or was it more about the fact you were going with your dad or with your friends or with your family?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I mean, to me, it was more about, the bond that I had with my family and going to see those and the excitement of it. But I certainly had people that I looked for specifically when I went. Andy Van Slyke played for the Pittsburgh Pirates in the 90s. Bobby Bonilla and Bonds, they were the killer bees back then. So, having seen Barry Bonds early in his day, that was an amazing opportunity. So, those were some of the people that I really look forward to seeing. I think that Mario Lemieux was another one for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Really grew up in a unique time in the early 90s, which I think was a part of really why it was so influential to me, and how it sort of shaped me.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because then you go from that to going in and actually getting a job within sport. As you were growing up, was sport always your number one calling, or did you fall into it, or how did you get involved in sport for the first time?
Yeah, I think like most people, it's rather circuitous. It's not something that's ever a direct line. I actually started going to school for automotive engineering. I wanted to design.
Different.
Yeah, I wanted to design and be a part of performance race cars. I did that for about a year in school and realized that I didn't have the mathematical abilities that I thought I did. So in that instance, again, falling back on what I knew and what I loved, I thought I'm going to take a run at the sports industry. So I changed my major. I went to school for sport management. And as I was graduating, the Pittsburgh Penguins were getting ready to build a new arena in Pittsburgh. And I knew that, a project of that sort was going to take some bit of hiring and staffing up. So I approached the local government sports authority in Pittsburgh, who was essentially managing the project with the Penguins because it was a publicly funded project. And I was able to get an internship there. So through that internship, I was hired full time and, spent nearly 6 years developing the new, what's now PPG Paints Arena, the Pittsburgh Penguins Arena, which, like I said, was really a full circle moment, having been someone who spent so much time in their previous arena. So that's kind of how it started for me. It certainly took a lot longer to come around and to put all those pieces together that I can describe in a few minutes. But it was really a great opportunity. I spent a lot of time, in addition to venue operations and football operations. When I was in college, I spent a lot of time scouting football players, American football players, and, really taking a love in the game itself. So had some great opportunities to be on the team operations side and the venue operations side. And it gave me a great skill set, a great foundation to sort of launch my career from.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I've said this story before. When I got a job at Munster Rugby, which had been the team I supported all my life, and I remember coming over there, and I was in the middle of my professional career, so it wasn't like I was a kid. And I remember they brought me into my first day, and they put me into an executive box and told me to wait there for the commercial director to come along. And I remember I was such a child because I'd been in that stadium so many times, but always on the other side. I was looking out onto the pitch and I was nearly crying, and I having to ring my mother saying how proud I was. And then straight away having to flick back into the professional me, which is trying to hide the excitement and instead replace it with just, yes, I'm here professionally. Would you have, I know it's a brand new stadium, but would you have had something similar, being such a Pittsburgh fan and a fan of the city and the teams in the city?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fine line. You don't want to come across as too much of a fan. It's not a good look whenever you're, working as a professional for the team. But at the same time, like you said, it's hard to hide those feelings. I'll mention again, like I said, I worked for the Government Sports Authority, and we were shopping for a new, board, essentially a video board for the new arena. And my boss wasn't able to make the meeting, and he said, "Hey, run up to the site and take a look at the new board they're proposing. They're going to set up a demo. And, just take some notes and tell me what you think." And as I walked up to take a look, it was just me and Mario Lemieux, who owned the team. And, that's one of those instances where I'm like, you have to really compose yourself.
Yeah.
It's easy to get a little starstruck in those instances, but, a great opportunity to blend a passion and, not only for your professional ability, but, what's important to you personally.
It also flips the other way as well. I was there at Munster for so long that one of the most famous rugby players ever, a guy called Doug Howlett, ended up being my boss. Yeah. And he was a New Zealand All Black hero, legend, still the top try scorer, he would tell me regularly. And I remember we went to a sponsor, and I rang them in advance, and I told them, myself and Doug will be there at 10 o'clock or whatever time it was. And the manager the next day after the meeting turned around to me and said he couldn't believe all his staff turned up. They all turned up. They all, even the reps who were meant to be on the road somewhere else, they all turned up the office for the time. And I was obviously, they weren't there to see me, even though my ego was that way. And it was just a little reminder as to where everyone sits. From where you're going within it, from the stadiums, and let's use the example of the Pittsburgh one where you had to redo the whole stadium. When you were looking at it, what was the most challenging part from your perspective that you were looking at within new stadiums? What's the kind of the focal point that you look at?
Yeah, I think trying to future-proof a venue is always the greatest challenge that you face whenever you're trying to build a new sports venue, trying to understand what it's going to be in 5 or 10 or 15 years and what the appetite is going to be from fans. I can remember specifically building that arena. I believe we were installing what's considered, category 4 cable, for internet connectivity going into it. And it was a last minute decision where, we better upgrade to Cat 5 because by the time this arena opens, it's going to be outdated. A lot of times that's the case. What you're building for is almost outdated by the time that the venue opens. So, I think the trying to understand what the future holds is the biggest difficulty. You're seeing that right now with a lot of teams like the Intuit Dome, the Los Angeles Clippers, really going above and beyond to try to make their arena so technologically advanced and giving what the younger generation, we're at the point now where Generation Alpha is becoming teenagers.
Yep.
And, their experience and what they expect, they're essentially the COVID generation. What they expect and what they want in a venue 10 years from now is going to be greatly different from what I look for, in a venue today. So I think that trying to understand that and plan for that can be quite capricious, the sports venue industry. So, that's some of the biggest challenges that you're going to have. You're always looking for new space that, if you ask any venue manager what their biggest challenges are, they're probably going to tell you 1, staffing, and 2, space allocation. As things have evolved in the world of sports, like, things like female locker rooms for officials and female locker rooms for coaches, this isn't something that a lot of venues were built for 15 or 20 years ago. And you have to find that space now. And it usually comes at the expense of storage space, which then again becomes a new problem. So, again, future proofing and trying to anticipate what's coming is usually the most difficult thing.
And then from your perspective, and it was something you just said that I thought was really interesting, that you'd be designing the stadium in let's say 2024, but in fact the stadium won't be built until 2026. So when you say future proofing for that comes right across the board as to what the requirement from your team would be. So let's use the team as the example. Would there be a lot of input that would go in from team management? Now, I'm not saying the coaches, but I would be saying whoever looks after the actual physical team, to make sure that the arena is to their liking as well, because you got to remember they are the home team. Or are you looking at it more from a perspective of, well, if we had to, we got to make the venue itself look the way we wanted to look at, and the team's kind of requests are a little bit down that list?
No, it certainly takes a village. The stakes are too high and there is too much detail involved for any of those decisions to be made in a vacuum. There are extensive meetings and planning charrettes and things that go into, really coming up with a stadium plan. And you mentioned if you start building today, maybe in 2026, but really if you start planning today and you come up with a conceptual idea and a site plan, you're looking at probably 5 or 6 years before a venue actually opens. And again, as the game continues to evolve, all that sort of changes. So it's a delicate balance, making sure that the team has what they want, but you also have to have a multi-purpose venue, right? When the team isn't playing, it's very important that you're able to host other events there, concerts or whatever it may be, so that it's a very profitable venue. So yeah, certainly a fine line, and it definitely takes everyone's input to get it right.
It was interesting. I was watching the NFL over the weekend, and I know this will come out in a couple of weeks after the Super Bowl, probably by the time it comes out, but Buffalo Bills had a very intriguing scenario up in Buffalo where the wind and the weather and the snow and fans were shuffling snow out of the way and all those kind of things. From a stadium director perspective, give an outline, or stadium management perspective even, give an outline of what happens if games are postponed or if they're pushed down the road. From just having worked at the Steelers, having worked in across the board, what impact does that have?
A lot of anxiety. It takes a great amount of work. I'll share a quick story. The Pittsburgh Steelers played the day after Christmas. I believe it was 2021. And we had a big snowstorm on Christmas Day that was sort of unanticipated. And, it's not something you can start clearing the day of. It's a 48-hour effort typically for the most part, depending how much snow you get. So, at 5 a.m. on Christmas morning, it was up to me and my colleagues to round up enough people to go and start clearing snow. It was a pretty significant snowfall. So, that's where you really have to rely on your relationships with vendors, people around the city, private contractors, staffing firms, whoever you can get. Pittsburgh's a little bit different than Buffalo in that from a union perspective, we wouldn't be able to pay people $20 an hour to come and shovel the snow, just because we have a different union establishment. So it takes a lot. It takes a lot of equipment. It takes a lot of people, and a lot of it has to come not only last minute, but at the same time that everybody else needs it, right? If the city's under a foot of snow, everybody's trying to get rid of the foot of snow. So yeah, it's difficult. It takes a long time. I think the Bills did a great job with what they could do, only a few days notice. But delaying a game, yeah, I mean, from an operations perspective, it's not so damaging. You're pretty much just doing what you would do on a Monday instead of on a Sunday. But from a broadcast perspective and from a ticketing perspective, logistically, there are a lot of challenges that go into that. During COVID, I was working for the Steelers, and our game with the Ravens, I think, was postponed 3 times. I think we were only the second game to ever be played on a Wednesday in the NFL. So, when you go through those exercises, it's out of your control, and it's really just a matter of problem solving and doing the best you can do with what you have.
I have a lovely story myself. When I was at Munster, we played a critical European Cup game, which would be the equivalent of a playoff game in the NFL or any of the American sports. And I turned up. I was the first person in the stadium. I was managing the hospitality department. I was the first person in the stadium, and it looked like a pool on the field. So I'm ringing the operations guy going, the game's not going to be played. And the game was about to kick off at 1 o'clock. And at 9 o'clock, he came in. He was like, what the hell? And he ended up, it was amazing to watch. They ended up getting it postponed to 4 o'clock, even though the away team wanted it desperately to go 24 hours so that none of our fans could go because it would have been a Monday. But also the way we did it was the referee turned up, and the operations director had our CEO talking to the referee for 20 minutes, the head coach talking to the referee for another 20 minutes to give him enough time before the referee could turn up to the pitch to see that the pitch was playable. So, and I remember looking out onto the field, and he had a staff of around, I don't know, 15, 20, but he must have had 100 people on the field that he found from everywhere just to try and just water the field or pick it. It was an amazing experience to watch, and he was able to get the game going. But you have to have a very good operations director with a lot of, as you just said, people in their phone that they can ring at any time, any day.
Yeah, that's one of the unique things about sports is that, it really is one of the few industries where everybody is almost required to do a little bit of everything. Even though I'm in a sports operations position and always have been, I really consider myself a salesperson at the same time because we're in the retention business. If somebody comes to a Pirates game or a Steelers game and doesn't have a good time, there's a good chance that they're not going to come back. So to your point, when the snow does fall, we're looking around at everybody's because it's all of our problem at the end of the day.
It makes it fun, though, in a weird way. It's part of what you love about sport. Moving into that, what you were saying a second ago about where you go from the operations perspective and retention and making sure you kind of grow it. You moved on into both the NBA and MLB. First of all, what was the main difference between both organizations?
Quite different. People talk about the sports industry. It's always sort of lumped into one, but each sport certainly has its own identity, its own culture. People at baseball games, typically it's a much more leisurely sport. People want to go in there. They enjoy time in the summer with their families. They enjoy walking around the ballpark and seeing everything that it has to offer, the different food offerings, the vistas that they can get from different areas of the park, the activations. The NBA, obviously a much smaller crowd, takes place indoors in the winter. So it's a more of a captive audience. People typically go in there and sit in their seat and are more interested in watching the game, but it's a much younger demographic. So they're much more engaged socially. They're much more engaged, from a player perspective and sort of understanding what's required of every player that they're, watching specifically on the court. And then football, from a similar standpoint, fantasy football is so large in the States that it's become a huge part of the game day experience for people. I mean, they expect connectivity. They want to be able to check their fantasy scores. They want to see it even posted around the building in real time. But the stadiums are more utilitarian. People were much more apt to go into an American football stadium to sit there and root on the team. So quite different from sport to sport. But at the end of the day, people are there for a good time and they want to feel safe. They want to be in a clean environment. And they don't want to wait in lines. That's a big part.
Yeah, that's a massive part of it even here. I remember being over in New York and I went to the Garden to watch, I can't remember, I think it was a college basketball game. In fact, I think it was the top 5, I can't remember what it was called. But I remember being blown away by the fact that where I went, I got my beer and my donuts and my hot dog, whatever I got, that whenever I went past it for the rest of the day, I was getting a text message to basically say, like, we know you're sitting there. Don't forget, you should have drank one beer by now. Go buy another one. From an ability to connect with your fan base and an ability to keep your fan base engaged, which you just said right there, is that ability to kind of be in somebody's pocket, be in someone's phone, the way that all of them are going? Or is it more a case of that it depends on the sport? As you rightly said, baseball might be much more leisurely with your kids, while football might be more intense, or basketball might be more intense when it comes to fantasy football, or just because it's five guys in the court that I want to know everything about. Does it change as the sport comes along?
I think if you were trying to future-proof it, as we were talking about earlier, and you're thinking about the younger generation, you want to have that engagement no matter what sport you're in, because that's what's coming. That's going to be the expectation. And that's a big part of what AI is bringing to stadiums now. You know, the opportunity to have people to have really immersive experiences with their favorite athlete or celebrity, or follow what's going on there. You know, you think about the impact, which is still being measured, of Taylor Swift on the Kansas City Chiefs and the NFL, and how that's, you know, affected young women and girls, you know, who may have been passive or not fans in the past. That connectivity and that ability to follow that in-game experience is enormous, and I don't see that going away anytime soon. You look at F1; they have a partnership with Amazon Web Services, which really gives them an immersive opportunity to follow their favorite drivers and in car. And really have sort of those unique tailored experiences that we haven't seen in the past.
When I was talking to AJ Poole recently, he spoke very well around sponsorships, around one-to-one sponsorships. That's no longer you get your name in the jersey or you put your advertisement board. And in fact, it's now become a scenario where it's fans want one-to-one experiences, like you just mentioned. That's no longer good enough just to say, here's the nearest bar, here's the cost of the food, off you go. It's much more of a personal one-to-one experience. That's starting to come into Europe. I've seen a lot of it in Europe where they've started to have those little different relationships, especially through use of Wi-Fi. But in the States, was AJ right? Is that the future of sport, as you said with AI? Is it the future of sport where it's almost my experience on match day might be completely different to yours, even though you might be in the seat really close to me?
Yeah, without a doubt. When I was at the MLB League office, I used to run our league-wide concessions calls, and one of the greatest topics that we constantly discussed was, you know, trying to understand who our customers are and how can we get the data of, you know, the person who sits in section 332 that likes to go buy 3 hot dogs and 2 sodas every game. How do we know that person, what they're buying and when they're buying it? And, you know, because of certain credit card regulations, you're not really able to pull that data. So now in this newer environment where, you know, cookies and everything else exist from an internet perspective, a fan will be able to walk in. If you're a Steelers fan, you walk into Acrisure Stadium and, hey, I know that you're a size large and your favorite player is Kenny Pickett. There's a size large Kenny Pickett jersey 100 yards away from you that just happens to be on sale right now. So it really gives you a new opportunity to engage and to, you know, be a little bit more aggressive with those sales opportunities than we ever had in the past, just because we didn't have the data and really an opportunity to speak with people.
Is there a danger, though, that you might alienate people who are above that generation? That the focus that we're looking at is at that generation who are turning teenager, going into years and are growing, but that also then you've got a fan base who may have been scared because of COVID, may have been impacted by that whole experience, may see sport as being their only way out. And then when they go to stadiums, they feel a little bit like they've been left behind because it's been focused a lot more on other ones. Is that a fair comment, or is that something that you're like, unfortunately, that's what happens when everyone gets older?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I think it's a fair comment, but, you know, I think the great aspect of a lot of these, you know, personal touches is that they're optional. They can be voluntary. You can opt out of these notifications. You can opt out of, you know, accepting cookies. You know, again, having been an MLB, the Ballpark app was, you know, one of the most influential apps from a league perspective when it came out. And, you know, there was some mixed reaction about it, especially as we rolled out paperless ticketing. You know, when virtual ticketing really started, it was a great concern of, do people really know how to operate this on their phone? Do they even have smartphones? Not everybody has a smartphone. And there's a learning curve there, but I think as long as you're offering opportunities for that clientele to not feel alienated, it helps.
Yeah, I think that's a really great answer around virtual ticketing. I had this conversation with a client of mine recently where it was very much about they're looking to go virtual, and they were terrified that their 65-year-old guy in who goes to all their games, would he impacted? And my response to that was, well, they did it at other clubs, and they've also got 65-year-old fans. There's ways to do these things, and there's ways to find out ways of moving forward. Brilliant. I'm going to go into the last section I have, which is my little top 10 questions that I get to know who you are and what you like and what you don't like. Don't worry, there's nothing in here that should scare you or shock you. I'm not looking to catch you out or anything at all. So we fly through them. Some might take a little bit longer than others, but whatever your first thought is the best. Soft drinks or coffee?
Coffee.
Netflix or the cinema?
Netflix.
What's the last thing you watched on Netflix that you can remember?
I just spent 20 minutes talking about the venue experience, and I'm saying I'm sitting at home watching Netflix. I watched One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest a few nights ago. Classic.
Oh, now that's a great call. That's up there with probably the best call I've had so far, because I've had loads of different ones like the cinema, Barbie and stuff, but that's a pretty damn good call. Your favorite stadium to go to?
I'm biased. PNC Park in Pittsburgh.
No bias at all. Best moment you've ever seen at a stadium? And the moment doesn't have to be on the field. It could have been off the field. It could have been when you were working there. It could have been any of those things. What's the best moment you can remember?
Oh, boy. The best moment that I witnessed in person, I think, was the 2012 National League Wild Card game when the Pittsburgh Pirates won their first playoff game in a very long time, 21 years, I believe it was. And the crowd was in a stir. It was unbelievable. That's probably my best in person. On TV, it would probably be boy, it's a great question. Probably be any one of Mike Tyson's knockouts. Never got old to me to watch those, especially when I was growing up.
I remember that when I was like 10. I remember watching his first ever knockout, and it was like being in awe of, because he was only like 19 or something, or 18, and he was just this freak of nature. So I do remember that. And RTE, the national station in Ireland, we'd have only ever had like one sports channel. Not even a channel, it was like one sports show. And it'd be like from 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock on a Saturday, and that was all you got. And that or Monday night. They used to have football on a Monday night. I remember those two things. When you joined the sports industry, what was the best advice you ever got?
I think it's some combination of, one, always stay humble, but two, always look like you have somewhere to go. One of my first managers told me people who loaf and who move slowly in the sports industry stick out like a sore thumb. And this is an industry where people move fast, and you have to continue moving fast. And there's a sense of immediacy when you're working in a venue. So that's something that's always stuck with me. And I think most people who work in operations maybe move at a little quicker pace than the typical citizen.
Of all the games you had been working in, be it in Pittsburgh or be it the NBA or MLB, is there one game that stands out to you that you just, for any variety of reason, whether it was to do with your job, whether it's to do with the occasion, or whether it was to do anything in particular, is there one game that stands to you?
Yeah, I was at the Tokyo Dome for opening day when the Seattle Mariners went there to play, and it was Ichiro Suzuki's last game. And it was incredible.
Wow.
After the game, the fans did not leave their seats for over 25 minutes and just sat there and cheered his name and applauded. He was literally almost out the door. Yeah. And he was kind of forced. I think it was Ken Griffey Jr. that talked him into coming back out and acknowledging the fans. And I had never seen 25 minutes after a baseball game, nobody leaving and everybody on their feet. And when Ichiro came back out and did a lap around the stadium, it was amazing. I mean, the people were just so elated to see them. That's his home. So that was probably the greatest sports game memory that I've been a part of working.
Two left. In Sweden, we have a thing called fika. And fika is when everyone at around 3 o'clock gathers around, and no matter whether you're working or whether you're at home, and you have a cup of coffee and you have little cakes. They're like nice little cakes. So would you like to have a fika, or would you like to go to the pub?
I would probably take the pub.
I've yet to find someone who said fika. Everyone seems to. Maybe it's the people I interview. Maybe it's the same thing. Last one. If you had to define sport and what it means to you, in let's say 2 sentences, what would be that definition?
This is a trite response, but I think it's the sense of community and the binding of it. Few things bring us together like sports do. No matter your political affiliation or where you come from or what you represent, I think when people are behind one team and there's 65,000 of you in one stadium, that's a unification that you rarely see in any other opportunity in life.
But Jason, it's been so great to have you on. Where can people find what you're doing, or what is it you're up to now? Where can they go find your work?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn. That's the best right now. My consultancy is a relatively new venture since October, but I have been working with some of the larger arena and stadium conglomerates to essentially go do assessments of their operations and of their venues, and consulting a little bit, from a guest training perspective, and people flow models, a lot of the things that go into an actual stadium, and some of the marquee live tentpole events that take place in non-traditional venues. Larger corporations don't typically have the staff to manage all of their large events, and when it comes to putting on something like an F1, that's when I have an opportunity to go and to help manage that for them. So yeah, I've been doing that sort of work, and you can find me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect.
Jason, thank you so much for your time. Massively appreciate it. And again, I love the jersey behind you, man. It's really, really class.
Thanks, Anthony. Take care.
Cheers, mate. I always say this after all my interviews, but that was really cool. First of all, you're talking to somebody who has the experience and knowledge within operations side of venues, but also was there when the stadium was first done. And some of the things Jason said, I think you should go back and look at it if you're looking around stadium development and if you're looking around how to grow and change your stadium, and it's future proofing for the future. So you're building your stadium in 2024, looking to go into 2026. But what's going to be there in 2026, and to start looking at whether that looks with space, etc. Also love this answer when it comes to around people who, let's say, are a little bit scared, a little bit wary around the new age stuff that's coming into stadiums, about how you can opt in, opt out, and feel comfortable in what you're doing. It's about telling your customers that's the process as well, so they don't feel like they're getting thrown on and jumped on. Really, really cool, as I knew it would be. It was absolutely fantastic. Thank you to everybody who's listened. You get the details of Jason's agency if you want to have a chat to him about his consultancy work. I'll put all his details in the bottom of the YouTube video, and also onto my website. And also, if you want to go onto my website, log on, register, do the usual things, and have a chat about how I can help you within commercialization of sport and growing your sport and growing your club as best as you possibly can. My music's going to kick me out. Thanks very much for listening. As always, look after yourselves. Take care. Thanks very much, folks.